Here we are at Lake Amistad in Del Rio, Texas for the very first Elite Series event, BAS event of the year. These fish are moving up on the beds. We're going to continue to have the new moon. We'll also be going into some 80-degree weather days, which is just going to encourage them to move up more and more every day, probably on the beds. The problem is we've had a lot of wind, so we hadn't been able to really see as many of the beds as we would if it'd be calm. But when you're in between looking for beds, we need search baits. And what I mean by that is a bait while I'm running a bank, I'm throwing out in the middle or I'm throwing it parallel to the bank. And my primary bait's probably going to be a trickster spinnerbait, half-ounce plus, with about a number 4 long drop blade on it. I'll put a Lucky Strike ringworm on the back of it. Same bait I was actually throwing in the Classic. There we go. And this lake is probably as good a lake there is in the country right now. It's just, I mean, it's a ball. You can catch fish just all day long on a majority of baits, which is, you know, from a recreational standpoint is great. From a tournament standpoint, that size fish is not going to do much good. In fact, if you probably don't have a 5-pound average in this lake, you're not even going to be in the top, 10. You're looking for beds. You're looking for those key big fish. And so you try to develop some in-between baits so you're not just doing nothing in between. Search bait, though, that primary search bait probably if we have the wind will be the spinnerbait. And normally I work this when the spinnerbait when the cover is real thick. Now when I've got sparse cover, the other bait I would be used, especially if the sun comes out and it gets a little calmer, would be the jerk bait. I'm choosing a pretty large jerk bait. This is a Lucky Craft jerk bait, mainly to try to encourage bigger fish. The final bait I would use is a search bait, and this is where you got some deep troughs and not a lot of cover. You've got some hydrilla in these troughs down, that's in the middle of these troughs, would be the Orion, deep Orion. Yeah, this morning before the sun gets high, where you can't really see the beds real well, I'm really fishing for still out on the main lake area, trying to find some pre-spawn fish. Kind of think in terms of in the pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn I try to visualize this whole lake was a month ago was solid ice, top to bottom, bank to bank. And then if you think about how the ice melts, what this lake would melt, the warmer areas melt first, which is back in your pocket, so it melts from the bank out, okay, because that's shallower water, sun hits it, it melts faster. The deeper water out here in the middle is it's like a big ice cube, it's going to melt the slowest. So the water out here stays colder longer. So these fish are out in the middle of the lake will be the last ones to spawn. First ones to spawn are normally on your north and your west pockets and your real protected pockets, because the sun is kind of in the southern hemisphere this time of year, so those banks get the most exposure. Then that's what I'll do. I really pay attention to how a lake warms up. Before I started really committing to bed fishing, when I'm fishing kind of what I call pre-spawn fish that are moving into a big flat that they're going to spawn in, or big pockets, area where it's a major spawning area, there's the key areas they tend to hold. We call them staging areas. These fish, let's imagine they're moving into this big pocket, and you've got points coming out. And the creek channel winds through this cove and comes by some of these points. And one of them we refer to is called an elbow. In other words, the elbow is just like the elbow that you would have in your arm. And these fish will not be out on the end of the point, and especially if there's a creek channel that comes through there, bends through there, that's going to be a key staging point. They'll hold there before they move up, and then on the way back out, they'll hold there again. Yeah, this is going to be more typical of these little bays and coves and pockets where they're now moving up pretty strong to spawn. Even though I'll still throw a lot of in-between baits in here because it's still the light's pretty low. All you're going to see right now are the absolutely shallowest beds, and actually the bigger fish will bed on your deeper beds. And those in this lake, due to the clarity, are probably sitting in anywhere from 6 to 15 foot. And so with this low light, it's hard. I'm not good enough to see those kind of beds. The thing about the real shallow beds, everybody can see those, so those fish get picked off pretty fast. It's those little bit deeper beds that are hard to see that you've got to work to find. It's another good reason to take your kids fishing with you, because they got those young eyes. Plus, that's why I brought my nephew with me. He's about, what are you, 6'4", 6'4"? Yeah. So height helps too. There's a girl. If you think they're just beginning to spawn, I won't just exclusively fish for bedfish, but I'm also fishing what I call in-between fish. Fish that can be caught other ways. So while you're looking for beds, you're still not wasting all that time. You have a good chance of catching fish at the same time you're looking for fish. Yeah, that's the size you gotta have, and believe it or not, you gotta have 5 of those every day. See, that's one of those in-between fish that you need, especially when you got conditions like this, and you're only seeing about 1/10 of the beds that are here. Ooh, right at the cameras. If you're bed fishing, you want to stay in the clearer part of the lake. And that's normally the lower ends of the lake. And this lake, most of it's clear because they haven't had any rain. But normally, if you're bed fishing, that's obviously you want the maximum visibility in the areas you're fishing. In the beginning, it's going to take a lot of effort to find this kind of water. Then it pays off year after year, because these fish are kind of like salmon. They go back to the same areas year after year after year to spawn. You have a good chance of catching fish at the same time you're looking for fish. I like to use faster baits, obviously, because you are going to be moving fairly fast on the troll motor. Working top waters, working spinner baits. A lot of times a top water, a spinner bait worked fast will show you an area, a fish will come up on it and swirl. And if you miss this, a lot of times he came off a bed. That fish is looking at it right now. He's catchable. I don't know how much time you'd have to spend on him, unfortunately. Now, when you're looking for the bed itself, what it is, it's like if you just had a little dust, a little brush, just brushed away, and there's maybe a few shiny rocks in one area. A lot of times, that's all you'll see. When looking at him, it's probably 2.5 to 3, somewhere in there, but until we catch him, you never know for sure. Your bait has to go where potentially that fish has put its eggs or it's going to put its eggs, because that's what it's going to defend. It's not going to defend the whole area. It's going to defend that little shiny area where it intends to lay its eggs. See, because there's times I look at him, he doesn't look as big. But then there's times when he looks like he... More important than your eyes is polarized sunglasses. And this is really where you need to bite the bullet and buy expensive sunglasses. If you really want to be serious about bed fishing, it's your window into that underwater world, and cheap ones are just not going to work as well. Yeah, he's probably 2 3/4 to 3, somewhere in there. I need to bring that's the problem. It's like you need to bring a scale so you can really know these fish exactly. This is a gorgeous area we're in. These big flats, perfect for largemouth. Big flats and protected because you come through a little narrow inlet and come into this kind of open bay, which is obviously going to warm up fairly quick because it's protected from the main lake. One of the primary baits I'm going to use will be a lizard. This is a Bass Pro Shop laminated lizard. I'm using a bright color because I want to be able to see it down there on that bed in 8 to 10 foot of water. I want to be able to see where my bait at. And that's so important in catching those big fish, is getting that bait on the right spot on the bed. If that doesn't work and the fish are a little bit timid, then what I will go to is a 6 to 7 inch trick worm. Just put it on a shaky head jig. The final bait I'm going to use is probably like a jogger worm, basically a Cinco type bait. And I'm going to Texas rig it with a 16th ounce, 8th ounce sinker. I'll use this on the beds, but I'll also use this if it gets dead calm and they quit hitting that spinner bait and jerk bait. And I basically then use this as a search bait, firing out to trees and stuff that I was throwing the spinner bait and jerk bait at, and just working it slower on the dead calm, bright days. Oh, but there's a nice one too. We've kind of talked about the type of areas to look for in the lake, the type of areas that warm up first, what the beds look like, the strategies about locating the beds, the different strategies. Yeah, I think that's a little bigger than that first one I caught.
I think so.
That looks like a good 5, solid 5, 5.5. We've talked about kind of the different stages of the actual spawn going on and when the fish are aggressive. We've talked about in-between fish. So that's really what I wanted to do. I want to give you the confidence that once you embrace it and you understand it and you learn it, then it's really probably the easiest form of fishing there is, especially to put lunker fish in the boat. Never gets old. Every fish is almost like the first one you ever caught all over.